the flag, United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you. Now, do we have any requests to address the board for a non-agenda, non-action items? All right, moving on, then we have the start of school update. Turn it over to Dr. Olet.
Yeah, just a couple things wanted to touch on, and we talked about this a little bit at our I guess we haven't had a meeting since we've started school. It's been a real positive start to the year. We had to run our staff back to school, get together a little bit different than we've done in the past. We did them by building, we did them in larger spaces and tried to keep people spread out. A couple things that I think people had concerns about as it related to masks and as it related to some of those different pieces, social distancing. And this kind of flows into the COVID operational update, but the masks, knock on wood, have been, the kids have been really, really cooperative on the mask. And that's been very, very helpful as we've started the year. We are 9 days in. As of today, knock on wood, and we continue to go. Our next major data point is coming up on Wednesday. The 16th is when we make a decision for the next 2 weeks. And again, we are reviewing the data every day. We're looking at the county data every day. It's not that we just kind of stick our head in the sand and wait till next Wednesday. I mean, we're tracking it, looking at trends. It's just we wanted parents to know that on those 2-week periods, they can look for that email from us so they don't feel like they need to be checking every single day that it might change that day. Because if it does need to change, it's usually because of, something that's a much larger situation, and we can adjust and work through that. As we continue to kind of work through the year, staffing wise, teaching staffing wise, we're staffed. We do have some open positions still in our school age care ranks, and also in our paraprofessional ranks, and some custodial ranks, some food service ranks. So some of our hourly staffs are still, we still have some open positions, but for the most part, things are motoring along. I would say that as you think about the start of the year, I've been in a lot of classrooms, talked to a lot of staff. I think people are excited to be back. They're happy to be back. However, there's a high level of stress right now with staff, which we knew was going to be the case. And we're going to talk about in the COVID-19 operational update, some of the things that we're going to be doing to try. Dave's going to talk about what we're going to try to do to address some of those concerns and what we're doing as we work through it. But I would say overall, it's been a great start to the year. We've been extremely just proud of, like I said, the way the community's come together, the way the kids have come together. Feel really good about the fact that we're 9 days in, and hopefully we're anticipating being able to continue to stay moving forward. We have had a couple positive cases, and we did send out communication on Sunday. We had a positive case at Hudson Prairie. We did send out a communication also today. We had a positive case at the high school. And so I just want to remind people that we've never once promised that we would not have any positive cases. It's just that we continue to deal with them and work through those challenges. And so we've been working closely with public health and our school nurses on that. And I can tell you that I just had a conversation today with public health, their lead official, and she's been extremely happy with the way we've been able to provide data for them as they think about close contacts and quarantining, and then also our mitigation methods. I would say that we are implementing about as tight of mitigation methods as any place in the county. And so we feel really, really good about that. And we're hoping that we'll be able to continue to keep open because of it. So with that, any questions about the start of the school year? Okay, which kind of leads into the next piece, which is the COVID update or operational update. And as I talked about, we've used the positive case protocols that we had spelled out for everybody. And, I had talked to the principal over at Hudson Prairie today. I said, did we get a lot of emails, a lot of calls? Because we sent out the very first communication was on Sunday. He said it's actually been very positive. Parents have been very good. We did have kids that were considered close contacts and had to quarantine, but overall, parents have been very positive. I think everybody's just kind of nervous as we have these cases. What does that mean? and who does that entail? Andrea and her team are definitely working through, as it relates to staff related issues to COVID and things along those lines, but we're in a pretty good spot. I wanted to have Dave kind of talk a little bit about how we're going to provide some additional support at the elementary level to kind of ease some of the stress that's going on.
Yep, thank you very much. So as Nick said, at the elementary level, the individual distance learning is very challenging. I think more so than at the other levels, primarily because of just the age of the kids. Kids at the secondary level are much more independent. So the idea of individual distance learning seems to work a little bit more smoothly, especially at the beginning. The overwhelming response we get from teachers at all levels when we talk about how it's going is it's really hard, but it's getting better. That's sort of the message we get over and over again. Having said that, the challenges at the elementary level are pretty significant, and they're further exacerbated by the fact that we are implementing a new curricular resource, the Fontes Pinnell Classroom, which is a fantastic support. And I think most teachers recognize it as a support because it provides structure to literacy, which is the bulk of the elementary day. But having said that, it's still a lot to implement, and it's a material heavy curricular resource, requires a lot of work. And that is a bit overwhelming for our elementary teachers as well. So our plan is, and this plan was developed, Nick, Andrea, Lisa Skoy, and myself started just brainstorming, and then has been further refined by bringing in a few other experts that know how we could operationalize this plan. But it involves hiring 3 clerical assistants, administrative assistants, level 3, to work in the 6 buildings. So essentially, it would equate to, on average, about a half a day per grade level team per building over the course of a week. We distribute them and their hours based on need at the building, which would be determined by the number of individual distance learners, because that is really what we're trying to support here. Yes, the curricular resource adds a level of complexity, but it's really about the individual distance learning and the support for the teachers that way. If you picture the way the individual distance learning works, there's a lot of material that has to go back and forth between the schools and home, quite a bit more than the secondary level, because it's easier to translate materials electronically at the secondary level. There are certain things that just don't translate well to an electronic platform at the elementary level. So the purpose of this position then would be to support the teachers by gathering and disseminating, organizing this material, making sure it gets back and forth comfortably between home and school so the teachers can just focus on instruction. It's not a paraprofessional position where they'd be providing support directly to students. It's support for the teachers on those managerial duties. This is one of the things that we heard loud and clear, and I think Lisa Skoyen was the one that really brought the issue to the forefront by explaining really specifically the feedback she was getting, and this was a design to directly address that feedback. We've talked to principals today, worked through some of the logistics. Amy Wise, our elementary curriculum specialist, would be overseeing the work that these individuals would do to make sure that it's very focused and supporting primarily the individual distance learners. Questions on that?
Rob?
So Dave, just to confirm, these are new positions?
Yes.
And
these are
then
new
what is the
positions.
financial impact of these ads? Do you have an idea?
Nick, do you remember the?
Yeah, I mean, we're probably less than $75,000 all in
In total?
And Tim can run the exact numbers, but I mean, it's really, because these aren't going to start just yet, but we have some things in place, and really it's what are some of the things we can take off of people's plates that are time consuming but aren't real high yield type of things that really it takes a certified teacher to do. And so that's where this came into play. So it's one of those things where I did give them the go ahead and start heading down this path. I know it just time is of the essence on some of the stuff, and we know that staff are really wanting to see us implement these things. And we're also going to be doing something, maybe Dave's going to talk about it with the subs, to kind of get immediate relief for our teaching staff until we can get these individuals up and running. And these would be 1-year positions, so these would not be an ongoing. These would be 1-year positions. Is that right? Is that kind of how we would set it up, Andrew? Is that right? So
Yeah.
Dave would kind of talk about what would be our immediate steps, because there is a little bit of a gap between when you advertise, interview, and hire, And we know that teachers have immediate needs right now.
Yeah, so thank you for that. And Andrea and I have been talking quite a bit about feedback we're getting from principals saying it would be great if we could do whatever we can do to support substitutes and helping them become comfortable coming into the school. So we put together some advanced training. We've had about 40 subs that came into the building. Very rewarding to see a lot of recent retired teachers come in for that sub training. That was wonderful. They're sort of our bread and butter, and they're very valuable to us. So having them come in was fantastic. But one of the things they expressed and the principals have been hearing is it would be great if we could have subs shadow in the classrooms to get a sense for what this whole individual distance learning environment looks like. Because if you remember, I mean, the individual distance learning is one thing, but obviously it's happening concurrently with in-person learning. So we can talk about it, we can describe it, we can even do some videos, but that's not the same as being able to shadow and see a teacher in action. So the plan would be in between the posting and the filling, which probably about 2 weeks by the time we'd get some people to fill this permanent position or the year-long position, bringing in subs to spend half their day shadowing in the classroom, the other half of the day fulfilling some of these responsibilities that we described that the clerical assistants would be doing. What this would do is twofold. One, it brings, as Nick said, immediate relief to teachers. Secondly, it increases the likelihood that we're going to be able to keep our classroom staffed with subs when that need arises.
Sue, did you have a question?
Carrie, you, okay.
I was just going to say, Nick, I am having a hard time understanding you,
No.
just for going forward.
You're having a hard time understanding me?
Yeah, and
Okay.
I am too, just a smidge.
Okay.
thank you.
And I think maybe what we might have to do is we might have to take the mask off when we talk, just slide it down
Way
and then
better.
put it back up because.
But you can understand me.
Yeah, but
Thank you.
You're projecting to us though?
I don't think that's it, but yeah, that's fine.
All right, Sue?
Okay, what are you hearing or what kind of reports are coming from principals or teachers about having to have enough time with distance learning to call back or have computer interaction or to get back to their students on a personal basis?
And that's a really good question, Sue. That is one of the primary concerns with individual distance learning, especially for those that have multiple kids that have selected individual distance learning. If you picture the way this works, now if you just have one individual distance learner, your instructional delivery model is still completely different. It's no different than having 2 or 3 or 4, but what you just described is the difference. It's the connections with those students, where if you have one, it's easier to carve some time out to be able to address those needs. And part of the design, which I think is a good design where the individual distance learning occurs with that classroom teacher, it can create some inequities because there's a bit of chance that's involved. We do have some teachers that have 0 individual distance learners. We have some that have 3 or 4. The most I've heard, I think, was 7, and that's quite a bit. Quite a discrepancy, obviously, between 7 and 0. So the idea with this plan is those teachers that are burdened with quite a few individual distance learners would get more of that support in order to try to take something off their plate. We even talked about there's some other support we might be able to do where if we bring a substitute into a classroom and allow that substitute to take the lead with the in-person learners, so the classroom teacher would have more time during the instructional day, not separate time outside of the instructional day, but during that time to build that rapport and relationships. Because, and especially at the elementary level, I shouldn't say that's really at all levels. It's so critical to have those strong relationships. And it's very deliberate at the elementary level, the way those relationships are formed. When you upend everything in this environment, those typical protocols and practices that are in place to build relationships are strained. And so that is an area that we need to support.
Any other questions from board members on the COVID update?
Mr. President,
Yes.
David, could you speak a little bit about IT and support for the teachers in elementary as far as, parents having problems? Are these teachers? Do they have a resource with the district for that? Do we have enough people in that position?
Great question. Our IT department has done outstanding work supporting families. So we've reversed things a little bit. Typically, the IT department is directly supporting staff members, teachers, assistants, different departments, and so forth. We have a help desk ticket system directly for parents and families. So if they have an issue and it's linked in all of their Google Classrooms, they click on it, and Jen Lotzi prides herself on being responsive, does an amazing job having a really quick response time. Having said that, they are running themselves ragged. They're working really hard to be that responsive. So it's not that it's easy. It's not that it's not taxing what they're able to do, but they're doing a great job of being responsive. Now, if you picture this, what we've really done is we've taken our IT department that supported 5,600 students and 400 certified staff and a lot of support staff. And now we're saying, and you're supporting all these families. And the support of the families is extremely challenging because they're not using necessarily our equipment, our system. So you can't just log on and see, what's going on. How can we help? It creates another level of complexity. Again, they're doing a fantastic job, but yeah, it's they're running themselves ragged and they're definitely taxed.
Other questions?
Mr. President,
Bruce?
just a comment more than anything. I can only imagine how difficult it has been and will continue to be. I think the entire year is probably going to be challenging for our staff and for our administration. This isn't an easy time for any of us. I did have a teacher over at our house briefly over the weekend from a neighboring school district, and they're not doing schooling the same way that we are, and their comment was, why can't we be doing it like Hudson is doing it, because it would seem to be easier. And I don't know that anything's easy for any of our staff at this time, whether it's here or any other. There's probably pros and cons on both sides for our staff. So appreciate you continuing to look for ways to make it easier, to make it a little bit better, or at least as good as it can be. So thank you for that. Maybe I missed it, Nick, but just curious on the staffing for busing. I think there was a couple instances there. How does Safeway feel about their pool of resources for busing and the ability to keep us up and running there?
I can have Andrew address that.
Well, I think at this time, they are maintaining their staffing, but certainly a concern. We're actually meeting tomorrow to talk more specifically, well, what if we have, some positive cases? I think with respect to the bus drivers themselves too, and it's unlikely that we'll have close contacts associated with positive bus driver cases because of the distance between the drivers and the students. But we will certainly have positive bus drivers during the course of the year. And
Sure.
so we'll want to make sure that we're supportive there.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, just close with saying thank you, to all the staff and the administration, support staff, everyone that's helping kick the year off. It's so great to have kids back in school. So just warm help, heartwarm welcome, and thank you to all of those that are out there doing their job every day. Thanks.
And just to follow up, and I know, Bob, you have a question, but with IDL, I know some people, there's a rumor out there that we're purposely trying to make IDL difficult in an effort to bring kids back. And that's just not the case. We are trying to do everything we can to make this a positive experience, both for kids at home, for our staff at school. Do we prefer kids to be at school? Absolutely. We think that, if we didn't think face-to-face learning was important, we wouldn't have rolled out a model that had us going 5 days a week face-to-face learning. We do feel it's very important. However, I can tell you, as Dave alluded to, both our teachers, our tech team, our administrative team, everybody is trying to do everything they can to make this go as smoothly as possible. But anytime you roll out something this complex, you're going to have hiccups, you're going to have bumps in the road. And I just want to make sure people understand that we are trying to do everything we possibly can to make it as smooth as possible. Bob.
Oh, I just wanted to comment or a question, actually. So what we're doing with the extra hires, that's to be used for basically prep time for teachers and to ease some of that.
Yeah, it's the material handling and the sharing of materials back and forth between individual distance learners and home.
And that has nothing to do with with our sub program as far as having like extra.
No,
subs.
so I mean, like Dave said, what it's designed to do is right now teachers are having to chew up their own prep time, or they're having to chew up additional time outside of the day to meet these needs. And so the thought process, it doesn't necessarily give teachers more time per se, but allows them to use their time in different ways by taking these things off plate. I mean, we're constantly trying to look at that. I know sometimes people may not think that, but we are trying to look and see, how can we pull things off people's plates, and what does that look like? And so that's really the way this is set up to give us the largest bang across the district, so that it impact all elementary teams across the district.
Thank you.
We should probably mention too that we have added some support at the secondary level. It's just handled differently. So extending some hours, offering additional hours to the folks that handle the daily individual distance learning work. So actually right where we're sitting here, they have boxes that are lined up all through here that each student that signed up for individual distance learning, they have a box and the material goes in and out. And a lot of people work to make that successful. So we've authorized some hours to ease that burden a bit.
Heather?
So as someone who's relatively recently had kids in our elementary schools, I know what a strong supportive presence volunteers have played in those schools. And if I'm remembering correctly, that's different this year, right? I've had several folks in the community throughout the summer and coming to the fall talk about kind of what can I do. Is there any way, and have we talked about the possibility of bringing limited numbers of volunteers into the schools to provide some additional support for teachers? I don't believe we've talked specifically about the volunteer piece, but we did view, and we want to craft these 3 positions as certainly a viable option for parents who want to go to that level. Like, we're going to post it by building so that if they want to have that presence in their children's buildings, it may be a really good opportunity to work during the school day. But I think volunteers, we've been holding off on that primarily because of the exposures.
One of the things that's our biggest challenge, obviously, is we have to know who's in the buildings, when they're in the buildings, and then it has to tie back to when we do have positive cases, because we have to do the contact tracing as it relates to it. And so it's not that we can't revisit volunteers potentially down the road, and I think we even have it in our plan to revisit, but it may be for providing some additional support in classrooms and things like that. But it's going to be where we need kind of consistency, so that we know that on Tuesdays Dave's always in this classroom, so that if we do happen to have a positive case in whatever classroom it is, and it happens to be one that Dave's in, we can give that as a close contact name, or a person that would be in there, and they'd make the determination. And so that's where right now we just don't have a plan as to how we could do that. It would have to be somebody that's willing to be really regular, and we haven't gotten that far along in that discussion. Not saying that it couldn't happen, but right now that hasn't been the focus. And then the last piece related, did you have some? The last piece I wanted to touch on, Tracy's actually going to touch on, is we're looking to get back to some level of normalcy, and as it looks at utilizing our facilities at night and renting our facilities. And Tracy's going to kind of talk a little bit about where we're sitting with that.
Certainly. So we are.
Nope. Up.
Does? Okay. So we're looking at opening up our facilities again for rentals, but we don't want to just open it wide up. So our focus right now is going to be with our priority 2 users, which are primarily our kids. So it would be like our HBA groups, MACO, so the youth activity groups that we would be focusing on for rentals. We're going to align with our athletics department. So as far as determining how many people we can support in a gym and all that, it will be the same as what we've got going in athletics. So just to take away any confusion. So aligning those 2, I met with Aaron last week and again today just to go over that so that we are on board. And then we'll continue to set up the contracts with those outside users, making sure that they're collecting rosters and following all of our protocols when they are using our spaces.
One of the major things is obviously taking attendance, so we know who is in the buildings at what time. Again, it goes back to contact tracing. But as Trey said, it's going to be limited to those tier 2 groups. So we're still the only type of adult use we would really have is tied back to our community ed. But we wouldn't have, let's say there's a AAU basketball team from somewhere, let's say Woodbury that wants to run our facility. We would say no, you can't do that if it's not 80% our kids. And so really what it is we do have our community group saying, hey, if these kids are together during the day, are we able to start utilizing your facilities in the evening? And so, and I think most of the athletic stuff aligns with how they would normally use it anyway. But the big pieces are just making sure that we can know who's here, they're following the masking rules and things like that. And we always have the ability, it's kind of like with anything, we always have the ability, if we start to have some issues, we can always tighten things back up and trying to see, we're just kind of dipping our toe at different times and trying to see how we're sitting. And there is no perfect solution on any one of these things. So trying to give a little bit, see how it goes, and then kind of go back and forth as we work through it. So that's kind of our plan of attack as we work through it.
Mr. President.
Yes, Rob.
So how we provide oversight for our teachers is likely different this year. Do we have an idea how we're going to help them in their reviews if we're not going to be in the classroom, or how are we going to provide that oversight so we can provide a proper review?
Well, and Dave can address educator effectiveness, but really our administrators are in the classrooms. They're doing observations. Actually, I just had a meeting this afternoon with one of our principals. He said, I've already done 11 informal observations this year in classrooms. And so, and principals are professionals. They understand that, there's a level of grace that goes with teaching something like IDL related. I mean, it's not going to be, as good as if they'd been doing it for 20 years, and I think that's the big stressor right now is, we've talked about it as it relates to IDL. IDL is not going as well as people would like, but better than they thought it would, kind of thing, where people would like it to be much better, top of the game, but it's maybe not quite as bad as they anticipated. And so it's kind of the same thing with the administrators as they go into these different rooms, is they take that in consideration. They know this is brand new to everybody. So trying to take that in consideration. Now, Dave, if you want to talk a little bit about what we're doing with educator effectiveness.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you. So last year, the way the year ended, we were really wrestling with that question because suddenly we're closed and we had evaluations to finish up. The state provided some flexibility that allowed us to extend those into this year. So the principal that Nick is talking about, and a lot of principals had to finish up actually last year's process. So a lot of the observations that are happening now are actually finishing up last year's cycle. But as Nick said, for the most part, the educator effectiveness system will run as planned, with the big operative word that Nick mentioned as well is grace. So if you think about educator effectiveness and the power of an observation, the least important part of that is the evaluation. The most important part is the feedback. And this time more than ever, it helps to have another body in the room just to take an objective look at what's going and find opportunities to provide feedback like they've never received before, because every teacher, as seasoned and skilled as they might be, feels like a brand new teacher this year. So having someone else be able to walk in, so we don't want to shy away from that process. We want to lean in and be part of that process, offer the feedback, and make sure that it is completely from a supportive lens, as it should be.
Further questions, comments? All right. I just want to, thanks for the report, Nick. Also, Nick, thanks for your outstanding updates throughout the day of that first day of school, giving the board updates multiple times during the day as far as how the start of school was going. And it's been, today we finished our 9th day of actual in-person learning. So we got 9 behind us anyway. I have heard the vast majority have been extremely positive. And I got one today briefly to share, was a parent who the kids, I'm not going to point out the school because I don't want to, push one school over another, but it's probably indicative of all of our schools. And he personally thought that each year he thinks that the kids have the best teacher they've ever had. And this year is no exception, Ben, and how outstanding the teachers are coming through on all of these points. And in the case of the one teacher sending 2 emails a day for the last 2 weeks, giving updates to parents about what's going on in the classroom and how their student is doing. So I think that kudos to everyone. I know this is a stressful time, but really appreciate the reaction and the follow through that effort that everyone's given. Well, let's move on to the annual seclusion and restraint report. Erin?
Yep, so this is the, can you hear me? Is that on? Okay. Annual seclusion and restraint report. So in each building, a crisis team of administrators, teachers, and support staff, as well as staff who work in special education, are trained in annual crisis prevention and intervention through our in-district trainers. The main focus, and will continue to be a renewed focus this year, is how to effectively use those de-escalation strategies so that we can decrease the need for seclusion and restraint. We really do want to focus on empowering more staff to have those de-escalation strategies so that we can decrease the need and increase our student connection to school as well. So during the 2019-20 school year, we did experience an increase in the need and use of seclusion and physical restraint, particularly at our elementary level. This was due significantly to a few students who required high level of behavior support and programming and lots of problem solving around what particular program these students require. So we'll be focusing a lot of our work again this year and continue to support our students and increase their positive interactions with staff and students at school. So included in the report, you'll find the state required data regarding number of incidents in the school district. Also included is some demographic information. And although this data is required for us to report, it's really important that we use this as a reflective tool within our programming as well. So really a few recommendations as we go forward into this year is increased focus training in really quality behavior assessments and behavior intervention plans, focusing specifically on proactive strategies, including trauma-informed care. And so this is really a focus for our school psychologist team, as well as our building mental health teams. And so to kind of braid those two programs together, that will help support this work. Another thing that we are going to implement this year is mandatory IEP or parent meeting after the second incident within a school year to discuss additional positive interventions and proactive strategies to avoid future incidents and also help us continue to foster positive relationships and a culture of support with families. And then, as I mentioned previously, continue that training in the de-escalation strategies for staff.
Questions for Erin?
Mr. President,
Okay.
Oh.
Rob?
No, go ahead.
Aaron, do you expect the levels that we saw last year to continue?
You know, it's really hard to say. I think that we've done an incredible amount of work in terms of appropriate programming and increasing our positive proactive strategies. So I'm really, I really do think we'll see a decrease this year.
And these numbers are only through March?
Correct.
All right. Sue?
I'm just going to say I had occasion to observe a principal and staff in the media center have to do a restraint and lower a child to the floor. And I was actually working with another student, but I was really impressed at the carefulness and the kindness, but they all knew what they were doing. And after a few minutes, they checked with the child and the child was ready to get up. And anyway, I had firsthand observations. So I think the training must be very good.
Yeah. I mean, our trainers are excellent. And, just as a reminder, seclusion and restraint is only used in emergency situations. So when there's an imminent threat of safety to staff or peers is only when that is used. So thank you.
Bruce, did you have
President?
something?
Yeah. And I'm not sure, are like paras often involved in this?
Yes, many of our special ed paras are trained in, yep.
So, I saw that we had openings where we were trying to hire more people there. So just a couple of questions on that. I can imagine that's a very difficult job.
Yeah.
I see our pay there as well. And I don't know how, I'm sure we look at where that ranks. I know we've done some things for that pay grade during, or for subs during the COVID times. Is that another area where we may need to explore that if we're falling short there? So that's question number one. And then question number two, how often do those jobs turn over? And is it a lot of training that seems like it's, something that would be a pretty large task, just on the ongoing training. Whereas if we can retain those individuals, would that be something also we'd want to look at from a compensation perspective? So just throwing that out
Yeah,
there.
that's a great question, and I can speak to the importance of having trained paraprofessionals in our special ed programming. Our special ed programming doesn't work without them. In supporting students in the classroom, we can't get to the level of inclusive practices that we want to get to without them. And, conversations that we have frequently at cabinet, just in how to recruit, retain, and make sure that people know how valued they are.
And I would say that, was it 2 years ago, we differentiated between the regular ed para and the special ed para by adding $1 an hour to the special ed para rate. We've had much discussion, and I'm sure we'll, as part of our proposal that we'll be giving next month for wages going into this year, I know we've had a lot of discussion regarding further differentiation to one-to-one paras. So those paras and programs, being able to compensate them at additional level.
Thank you very much.
All right. Any other questions? Okay, moving on to the curriculum improvement process. Dave?
Thank you very much. So every year we bring to you an update on our curriculum improvement process, primarily to set the stage for the series of presentations you'll be receiving from our assistant directors at all levels, or the assistant directors and the curriculum specialists at all levels, when they run through and update you on the various curricular areas. Now, the curriculum improvement process is one of the most important processes we have in place in teaching and learning, because all of the work we do related to curriculum, instruction, assessment is all driven by this process. So it's a 6-phase process, and it's based on the concept of understanding by design, operative word being understanding. It is all about gaining student understanding through a very thoughtful and deliberate process. Understanding by design is essentially made up of 3 phases. We then adjust that to a 6-phase process that allows us to sort of track our improvement process through 6 years, which is about what we budget for new resources. So that drives the 6 phases that we have. The first 3 are all about development, and then the last 3 phases are about reflection, revision, and adjustments. When we break down these phases, it's important to understand one of the concepts or the key tenets to understanding by design is the idea of backwards design. And sometimes that's what people refer to this process as backwards design. What we mean by backwards design is we start with the end in mind. It's very typical, and most of us that were trained as educators, when we went through our undergraduate work, you learned a lot about lesson planning. You learned a lot about planning experiences. And quite honestly, it's what motivated most of us. I know when I was a new teacher, what I was most excited about was planning engaging experiences. I wasn't necessarily driven by the assessment or the outcomes. That limited my impact as a teacher. Now, taking a step back, I understand that. And I think teachers going through their training now understand that much better than I did, because this is now sort of the gold standard for curriculum improvement. So the first phase is all about identifying desired results. When we talk about desired results, we're talking about enduring understandings. The way I would describe an enduring understanding It's that thing that you talk about now as an adult. Like, remember that class we had in high school? Remember that big concept we explored? Something that sticks with you long term. That's an enduring understanding. An essential question is the next level, also identified in stage 1. The essential questions would be those things that you want a student to be able to answer at the end of the course. So the summer after, you'd ask a question, you want them to be able to answer those essential questions. There should only be a few per course. And then we get into the standards and the prioritization of standards. And we talk about that quite a bit, how important it is to accurately prioritize standards. That entire process is led by curriculum specialists and teachers, teams of teachers that work through this process. None of this happens without teacher leadership. It's embedded in each and every one of the steps. When we get to phase 2, this is the assessment phase. This is where we determine the assessment evidence that allows us to say, yes, we know that a student knows or is able to do whatever it is that that standard would call for. This is probably the most challenging of the phases. I presented last September. We've made some significant changes to this phase based on the feedback of the curriculum specialists and the teachers. And here's what it boiled down to. A lot of the curricular resources we ultimately select have assessment resources associated with them, and they're often really good. So what happens, sometimes we go through this process of developing assessments, and then we select the resource and we sort of undo what we did. So what we're really looking at here in this phase is identifying clearly what success looks like. Not necessarily the tool we'll use, not necessarily the test or assessment we'll use, but we identify what success looks like. That's critical. When we have that, we know we're ready to go to the next phase. The next phase is the one that we, I think, most often associate with curriculum improvement, and this is where we develop learning experiences. Also, an absolutely essential, important, and in many ways the most rewarding of the processes the phases, because we go through all of that big thinking about the outcomes and the assessment, and then we finally get to say, and here's what it will look like when I'm in the classroom teaching, and that's what I think really motivates teachers. So we plan those learning experiences and the instruction. One thing I wanted to call out there, we've had a lot of conversations about multicultural education, diversity, and inclusion. This is the phase where we would most directly address that. And what we're doing is deliberately adding a lens where we're taking a look at the different aspects of the curriculum or the resources we'd select and taking an equity lens to that approach. So we've officially adopted that into our curriculum improvement process. We did some work last spring and then into the summer. We still now need to work through those individual, they're sort of mini protocols. This is the big process, but within this process, there is literally dozens of sub-processes that need to be carried out to ultimately create the best and most robust curriculum for all of our students. So that happens right there in phase 3. When we move on to the next 3 phases, they're really all about implementing, reflecting, and revising. So in the past, this wasn't considered part of the curriculum improvement process because we've selected the resource, we've created the lessons, we've created the units, and it's sort of hands off, and now we'll let that sit and just we'll catch back up in a couple of years. But what we've come to realize, it's critical that we do annually reflect and revise. This is another place where teacher voice becomes critical because they're the ones that are living the curriculum. They're the ones that are delivering it on a daily basis. So they're the ones that can provide input to say, you know what, I know this is what we're looking at and what we thought we'd be able to accomplish, but I think if we make this slight adjustment, we'll have better results with our students. That happens in this process. Every single one of our content areas at every level is someplace on this process. There's never a pause. It's a continual process that goes on and is intended to, it's very much modeled after the plan, do, study, act sort of idea, where you do some planning, but then it's time to get going and then look at what those results are and make the minor adjustments. I want to make clear that in those last 3 phases, these aren't wholesale changes to everything that we planned. They're minor adjustments based on the feedback. So throughout the year, we'll be bringing, again, a series of different curricular areas to you. We plan on emphasizing the process this year. We want to make sure that when we're presenting, you as board members in the community get a strong understanding of how we're applying the logic of each one of these phases to make sure that at the end of the day, we have the best possible curriculum and instructional plan that we can for our kids. Any questions?
Any questions of board members? I haven't seen anybody snap up their hand, but just one, I guess. You described this as a continual process. So just taking one area where we've recently received requests for review would be in our, curriculum relating to racial history and equity issues and so forth. So if we were to do a review of that, and how long practically would it take to revise?
That's a really good question because there's not a clear answer. I think there's a door open somewhere. That the issue of racial equity would touch many different curricular areas, not just one. It's going to be heavily involved in social studies, obviously, very much in English language arts, in the literature that we choose and we select, but it's going to touch every single area, even something like math that you don't think about. There are sample problems in math. There are different scenarios, and we need to recognize that we can't always have a white lens to that, to the selection of the names and the scenarios. And then when we talk about our assessment, we need to make sure that there isn't racial bias embedded in the assessment questions that would create an undue burden for any student that may not have what we would consider the upbringing of the majority in our community. So it's, again, an ongoing process. I would say that there are times, and this might very well be one, where we need to do more of an audit of the curriculum, where we dig in and look at the existing practices, as opposed to just let the process carry out, where we can dig in and then essentially set ourselves up so when we get to that place in the process, we're ready to adjust and make those adjustments that would be necessary.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other questions, follow up of that?
Mr. President?
Yes. Heather.
Just quickly, is there currently a way that, I appreciate that teachers are heavily involved throughout this process, including that phase 3 where you said a lot of the diversity, equity, and inclusion issues might be addressed. Are there ways that community members currently plug into the curricular process, or how do people best share feedback or influence kind of curricular decisions?
Yeah, and also an excellent question. It's something we've recognized as a deficit in our process. We'll be developing what I would say a generic survey. When I say generic, that would be applicable to all curricular areas, that at a certain point in this process would go out and we'd seek feedback from all families as they're experiencing it. The other place where we can get feedback is through our Teaching Learning Advisory Council. And I'll just put a plug in. We have open spots. We'd love to have more people apply to be part of that Teaching and Learning Advisory Council. We can make sure I can talk to Tracy and get that out to get more voices involved in that process too, because that's a very proactive and responsive avenue to have voices heard. And we'd love to have, we'd love to make sure that we are not essentially pigeonholing ourselves to a certain perspective through that process as well.
Anything else? All right, then moving on to the action items in our agenda, and just a reminder, board members will be adjourning in 25 minutes. So we have, first up is the consent agenda items.
Mr. President,
Yes.
I move approval of the consent items and that the Chief Financial and Operations Officer be authorized to pay bills in the amount of $1,429,221.07.
Is there a second? Second by Heather. All those in favor of approving all consent agenda items 1 through 5, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The items pass. Next up is preliminary 2021 budget, which I will add has been a discussion at the last 8 or 9 board meetings. Tim, I guess this is, and it'll still be further updated, I guess, before our final approval of the levy. But why don't you give us any kind of update?
Sure. Yeah, you guys are probably getting tired of looking at this, but it does continue to be a work in progress until we get to the DPI, when they get the final numbers to us in mid-October. If we look at the major assumptions for the budget, those really haven't changed much. structurally, we continue to kind of have that decrease in state aid overall. There is a situation, which I mentioned before, where it's possible that we could see a bump up in state aid this year, and really due to the underspend that we had in 1920. But there's, the state has to determine that. It's all based on statewide information, how all the other 424 districts have spent or underspent. So we're not going to know what that number could be until we get to the final number in October from the state. But that's really a footnote at this point. We look at the estimated mill rate, that's down 3.5% in this budget, and we still continue to outpace the state in valuation. So we're at 7.2% increase in property valuations. The state was at 5.5% on average statewide. That also is kind of a double-edged sword because it does tend to drive up our negative tertiary aid. That's when our aid gets redistributed. Some of our aid gets redistributed to other districts. So that tends to be a challenge. The under levy is about just under 3.5 million, or just under 3.3 million. And again, that's direct property tax relief to property owners. If you approve that budget, that's 3.3 million that will not be levied on property owners. This assumes a 1% board approved increase to wages and salaries, and also includes performance pay structures. We have a levy for $225,000 for community services, and that's really to recoup some of those COVID-19 losses that we sustained. And just a footnote on that one, about 72% of school districts do have a community service levy. This would be our first one, really. When you look at this version of the budget, it also includes about a little under 1.9 million for COVID-related expenses. And you can see the list there. I won't go through that. But when you look at that and look at our total bottom line of expenditures, if we take that out, we're at about 1/3% increase in expenses. So we're just about flat without the COVID related expenses. So I think that's a pretty telling story. If we move on to the budget summary, again, I won't go into a lot of detail because you've seen a lot of these numbers before and they haven't changed in a major way, but our revenues are up about 0.5%. Property taxes for the general fund are at 3.3%. And then you can see the equalization aid, which is that line 621, that's down 4.1%. So again, that's that structural funding. We used to pretty much be a 50-50 district. So funding was 50% levy and 50% state aid, but that is flipped. So if we get down to the bottom, as I mentioned, expenditures are about 3%, but if you take out those COVID-related items, we're at about 1/3% increase in those expenditures. If you look at that bottom section, general fund surplus, and you look under 1920, you can see that the estimated budget to actual variance was very high this year, so 5.1 million, and that was due to being shut down in mid-March. And so that's possibly going to have an impact on our state aid for this year. We also have, in this budget, we've got for 2021, we've got a deficit budget of about $1 million. So we'd plan to take that $1 million out of fund balance. And this would leave us with the 5.1, or actually 5.8 going in, and reduce it by about $1 million. So when we look at what's happening around us right now, there's a possibility there could be a budget repair bill that might affect this year's budget, actually. Maybe a little less likely because the state tax revenues have come in better than they expected. So that's probably less of a possibility. But when we look at the next biennium, the 21-23 biennium, there's a strong possibility we could be cut in one or both years. We just, there's just so many unanswered questions around this. But when you look at some of the economic data, we've had the CARES Act support do a lot of support of the economy right now. And some of those things without a renewal of something like that, those kinds of things, we may start to see some more deterioration of that. So going in, it's a big question mark. If you get down to the bottom section under the committed and unassigned fund balance section, again, most of those numbers are the same as what you've seen before. So we stand at about projected 32% of fund balance. So about 2.4% above the board policy of 25 to 30%. So any questions so far?
Mr. President,
Yes, Rob.
as it relates to the self-funded health fund balance, of course, March came, people stopped doing everything, including going to the doctor. Do you expect that to be upside down or be worse off next year?
Well, that's a good question. So, yeah, as we talked before about that, that additional 5.1 million that wasn't spent, a large portion of that, almost 2 million or about 2 million of that was due to not taking it. The only appointments that were necessary were the absolutely necessary appointments, and delays and appointments and elective surgeries. So we saw a big drop in our claims, and so that was about $2 million. What we've seen going into the first couple of months is that's spiked up. I don't think in this budget we're anticipating that we're not going to touch the 1.9. We think we've got enough budgeted there right now to account for that. We didn't necessarily bring that down because we did anticipate that once things opened up, we would probably see a bigger than ordinary claims notice for the next few months. So right now we're tracking okay with that.
I just wanted to add on the comment you said about the possibility of a budget repair bill might be less, and I just had a conversation with Shannon Zimmerman, who's on the Joint Finance Committee and is also our assembly person for this district. And he shared in that, he said it highly unlikely we're going to see a budget repair bill between now and when our levy needs to be finalized. But after the election and after the dust settles, he didn't want to make any promises what could happen in the next two fiscal years, I guess the biennium that follows. And I took that as interpretation. We should better have our rainy day fund ready to go.
Yeah, I think that's good information to have, and good. I think we're positioned pretty well to be able to bridge those gaps in the next couple of years if we have to.
Is there a motion then to approve the proposed budget and levy?
So moved.
Second.
All right. Motion by Rob, second by Sue. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Moving on to modifications to the certified staff handbook.
Andrew, do you want to take this one, or do you
Sure.
want me to take it?
I can certainly do it. So this is just the modification to increase the payout for personal days, unused personal days from $75 to $250. So it's just the one modification.
And this goes with what we talked about at the last meeting, where we proposed to get it more in line with what it cost us for a sub in lieu of a personal day. And we know that our keeping our building staffed is probably our biggest Achilles heel as we think about COVID and moving forward. So it just really what it does is it puts it in a line with what our costs would be if they were to take that personal day versus sell it back to the district.
Clarification question, then this change to the handbook is expected to be 1 year only?
Well, at any point you can change it back. This could be 1 year only, or you can leave it the way it is. It's completely up to you guys.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, motion by Carrie, second by Sue. Any further questions regarding this one change to the handbook, which we had approved other changes previously? Yes. All right. Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. It's passed. Next up is Title IX related policies. And Andrea, you're deferring to Aaron on
I
that?
can start it off.
Okay, very good.
So we had reviewed these at the last work session. There haven't been any changes except with the numbering since you saw them last. So just a reminder that this is required, adding the new Title IX policies and procedures. It also required us to make some adjustments to two student policies and two employee policies. Just wanted to talk a little bit about how the Title IX works with we did a lot of work with our non-discrimination and our harassment policies and just how they kind of jive and work together. So really, when we get a complaint about anything, we really need to sit down and look at which avenue are we going to go with this. If it's harassment on the basis of sex, we're going to go with our Title IX policies. In talking this through with Shayna as well, the Supreme Court did uphold that gender nonconformity and transgender could fall within that category as well. If the harassment isn't on that basis, then we do have our harassment, bullying, and non-discrimination policies and procedures to fall back on too. So just wanted to clarify that.
All right.
Mr. President.
Yes.
Thank you for that clarification, Aaron. I really appreciate it. It was I wasn't sure how they, kind of merged or
No, it's a good
interplayed.
question. It's confusing for
Thank you.
sure. Mhm.
Just as a reminder for, it's been 3 weeks since we had our work session on this, but you recall that these are changes that bring us into compliance with federal code and as well as the interlay with the state law. So these are mandatory changes, and because they need to go into effect, I need a motion to approve on first, waive the second reading and approve on first reading.
So moved.
All right.
Second.
All right. I think Heather moved for the approval. Bruce second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. And the Title IX related policies are approved. Next up, we have the strategic plan, which has been worked on for basically a full year with Studer, and we've had 2 presentations from Studer at our last work session. This one-page summary of the strategic plan was presented to the board and discussed. Is there further change from the last board meeting 3 weeks ago?
So I did highlight some changes we made. We got some feedback from different board members. So there are some changes in yellow. We did add the word non-discriminatory in the pillar our students. And then we did on the 5th bullet down in that same column, we did add applying the lens of equity for all. And then also in the first bullet in the middle column, we did talk about trying to have a staff that is representative of the diversity of our student body across the district. So those are the only changes that have been made to this point. Otherwise, this is the same one that you saw at the work session. I know, just to kind of talk a little bit, a couple of things. I know Heather and I met, I talked to some of the other board members, is with the strategic plan, if you remember, this was kind of an ongoing process. So about 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, the board kind of talked, we had a conversation about trying to get consistent data, measurement points, things like that, trying to be consistently reporting out. And kind of the response to that that we implemented 3 years ago was our district scorecard. And we had those, we worked on it as a leadership team and kind of came up with the different data points that we look at the whole district as a whole, and what those would be, and we'd be consistently measuring those data points. And then kind of that next step, so we kind of did this process a little bit juxtaposed or in reverse. But then the next conversation, I remember we had board members asking, we have HSD 2025, how do we have a more operational look at HSD 2025? What does that look like? And so then that's where really we started down this path of the strategic plan. And what we did with that is to get to where we're at, we did kind of a crosswalk with HSD 2025, our Raider Way, our board guiding principles, as we looked at all those different components, and we kind of put all those different things together. We had focus groups representative of different groups in the community, teachers, students, staff, to kind of get feedback with Studer. And then this went through, I think, 5 edited drafts to kind of get to this point. And so then as we kind of unveiled, this strategic plan, I realized that, some of our mission, vision, value statements that are still in HSD 2025, as of right now, they kind of hold, but we probably are going to be looking at revising those. So it's kind of like doing this process a little bit in reverse than where we would typically do it, but still a doable process. And I think we're in a good spot so that what also comes from this is after this gets approved, is then the building principals, department leaders will be working with our representatives from Studer directly to create what's called action plans around this. And then you'll be able to see the actual actionable steps that people will be taking around this. So the strategic plan itself is designed to be a little bit more 30,000 foot level, and then those action plans are really at a much closer level, and that's what you'll be getting and getting updates on as the year goes on.
Thank you for letting us know what the next
Yep.
steps are. And is there any discussion or do we have a motion?
Just
Sue?
a comment. So I appreciate that you asked us at our August 24th meeting to please contact you if we had any input. And I know Heather did and I did. I don't know who else did. I hope others spoke with you. And I'm glad that we can be fluid enough here to consider the impact of numerous accomplishments this last year that we've achieved, especially in the area of our discussions on equity and race and so on. And so I'm glad they can be at least in some honorable way be recognized in the pillars. And and I know that way back when we were doing the Post-its on the wall, this also incorporates just some initial kind of fun engagement that we had. I remember that Bruce had a lot of fun doing that. And we came up with the, supporting an inclusive environment. And I was very impressed with us arriving at that. Thank you.
I will just say, we did add the word non-discriminatory in our pillar. I mean, because I think there's some discussion on what does inclusive mean. We want it to be inclusive. The only question we'd have would be, with this, do you want us to move that word or work it into more of one of the bullet points versus being up in the pillar? Just because a lot of times non-discriminatory is like the bar, like the lower bar set by the federal, and we want to go to a higher level than that. You know what I mean? Because it's one thing to not be discriminatory. It's another thing to be inclusive.
And I would just, because we did have a really good discussion about it in cabinet today, where we thought about, okay, what are we striving for with our pillars? And my only hesitancy, certainly supportive, inclusive learning environment where all students achieve. Totally impactful and meaningful. My concern, not concern, my wonder would be that the use of the word non-discriminatory. So I don't know if we're striving, because we should just be that, right? Like we should be a non-discriminatory employment school district environment that that was I think one of our wonders during the conversation is there another way we can say something we're striving for instead of the legal compliance, which I would hope that we would definitely be in compliance with.
Are there any suggestions?
Would equitable have that same connotation, or would that be more palatable?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you said, Carrie.
Equitable.
Carrie, that's the same word I was wondering about. To me, inclusive is even less aspirational than equitable. I mean, so I think, I like the word equitable is down below in that new suggested language, but to me, that feels more aspirational than non-discriminatory.
So if we were to work that in, versus the term non-discriminatory, would you be okay with that? Do you want us to bring it back? I think, do we have the gist of what that is? The only other thing I forgot to mention is this was an older one. It's actually 2020, 2025 on the top. I know in the plan here it says 2019, 2024, just because we got kind of delayed about 6 months.
We'd all like to forget 2020, I think. But
yeah. So I know, Sue, you had one of the comments about non-discriminatory. What your thoughts on that?
Actually, as you read that, it's really, it doesn't flow.
Yeah.
It's bad poetry.
Yeah. So, are you guys all right if
I think that I would trust the cabinet and so on to work on that. And as you were saying, what we are and what we're aspiring to, but just somehow work in this new consciousness and effort that
Absolutely.
we're really have, I mean, we're reading a book and we've all been to WASB and state conventions and everything's about equity and we're trying to understand that. So something that's a little bit, gives it some vitality and
Okay.
humanity.
So if we go ahead and make that change, are you guys okay with us doing that then?
Well, how about we do it in the form of a motion, then we could just do a motion to
Yep.
approve this strategic plan with that word non-discriminatory maybe being changed or deleted.
Yep. Okay.
Is there a motion?
I'll move that to find another way of expressing our aspirations in terms of equity and not necessarily use the actual word non-discriminatory.
Okay. Is that a motion for approval? then?
Yes, I'm
Okay.
making that a motion.
All right.
Second.
All right. Motion by Sue, second by Bob. Any further discussion? Rob?
Yeah, Nick, thanks for the time today talking through this. But just to confirm, this wasn't driven just by the district. Working with Studer, this was from a community standpoint, the community was heavily engaged.
Yep.
We offered opportunities for the community to participate. Can you briefly, really briefly, just talk to that community engagement, please, with this?
Yeah, so it's been over a year now since we did that. But yeah, we did get different stakeholder groups in the community. We sought out people, we invited them. We didn't just kind of put a shingle out and see who came. I mean, we actually sought people out. Gail met with the different focus groups over a couple days. It included, like I said, everything from students to staff to teaching staff, administrators. It also included members of our business community, members of our retired community, parents, just a variety of, I think she met with like 150 or 160 different folks over 2 days from trying to get all the different areas. So to make sure that there was lots of voice in the process.
All right. Any further questions or comments?
Mr. President, are we voting on just the use of non-discriminatory or the entire thing?
The entire thing. Yep.
Can I make one other comment?
Yeah, you can make a comment.
And the recruiting, retaining of the employees, the first highlighted point where you say that representative of the diversity of our students, I think that's actually pretty limiting. It's a pretty homogeneous student body, I'm guessing. So maybe just representative of diversity.
Yeah, I mean, we absolutely can do that. I mean, the big thing that most schools do strive for is to have their staff represent their student body, and we do have diversity, not just ethnic diversity, but we also have a variety of other different areas, and so that was kind of the thought process behind it, so that we made sure that our kids felt like that people that could relate to and things like that. So that was the rationale. But I mean,
I'm sorry, what was that point? I couldn't hear you.
The rationale was that our kids had adults that they could look up to, they'd see themselves in, they could relate to in that way. And so although we may be somewhat of a homogeneous staff as it relates to ethnic backgrounds or race, we actually are quite a diverse student body as it relates to other characteristics that we would have. And so that was kind of the thought process, but it was just, that's typically what we've tried to work for. If we can get to the levels, if we can have as diverse of staff as we have as diverse of student body, we'd actually be making huge strides.
Should we table this then and do another work session, or can we have a vote? Somebody can call the question. Anybody, want to table this so we can wordsmith it some more in work session?
Mr. President, I guess, point of clarification process will have you. Since there's a motion, it's been seconded, do we have to, the person who made the motion, take that off the table before we table it?
It's been proposed. The motion is pending.
Okay.
We'll have a vote, and if the question is called, otherwise we can talk about it more. We can go adjourn this because we can talk about it more after the annual meeting.
May I make a comment?
Yes.
I would say we go ahead and vote and trust that the administration could wordsmith and we'll
Okay.
look at it again later.
All right, then all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. It's approved. Now, we've got one more agenda item, and it was put on at the request of, well, I requested, but Rob pointed out that we have a deadline, so we really need, he was asked to be on the committee for the resolutions, and it's the same resolution we've discussed before, except it's been updated, I think improved. All board members have an opportunity to read the proposals, but I'd go either way and defer to Rob. Do you think that we can go ahead and vote on this, or do you think that we should adjourn for the annual meeting and then take this up so we can discuss it into the night?
Whatever's most convenient for, for the board. I mean, we do have, if the board agrees to move this forward, it has to be postmarked tomorrow.
Yep. So that's why the urgency to get it done. Yes,
Yeah,
he just said it needs to be postmarked
Yeah.
tonight.
So this kind of got away from me with everything we had going on at the start of the school year. So again, we added some more clarity because that's some of the feedback that we had gotten last year. Added, so the stuff in red is the additional descriptors. When we got feedback both from WASB and also from board members. And so I know it seems rushed. It does seem rushed. I totally get that, but we were kind of this one is 100% my fault on this. I just lost track of it as we got ready to start the year and everything else going on. So if you're supportive of it, the intent has not changed from last year when you supported this.
Is there a motion one way or the other?
Motion to approve.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and approved. Any further discussion? I think it's pretty self-explanatory, the changes, but go ahead.
Just one comment since we're moving on it now. I mean, I think all of the pluses of this are outlined pretty well in the motion. I do feel like I need to say, I mean, the minus or the argument against it would be that sales taxes are regressive, right? And so they impact low-income people the most because everybody gets a penny, but that has a harder hit on low-income people. So I think to put that out there, the pluses and the minuses, the pluses are very strong, but just to be transparent about that, that is an argument against this, is that it is a regressive tax.
Mr. President,
Yes. Right.
just I guess to tag on, or not tag on to, but to comment on Heather's, statement. The idea is from a resolution standpoint is to keep this loose. Certainly if we're fortunate enough and this is passed by the delegate assembly, ultimately it would go to the state and our lobbyists would pursue it. And at that point, it can take up any form to alleviate some of that regressive tax standpoint. So for instance, sales tax as it relates to certain groceries, certain clothing items, those things might not be impacted by this, but it's up to them to debate. The idea is just to hopefully find support for our schools, school districts throughout the state, so they have other funding options and at the same time provide property tax relief. I don't know if that helps or not, but the idea is not to worry about the regressiveness of this tonight. Let our legislators handle that.
Further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the resolution say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay.
Nay.
The ayes have it, and it's approved. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We stand adjourned. The annual meeting will begin at 7:00.
looking back at me. I don't know. Yeah, I know. No, did I brush my teeth or didn't I? Thank you. Yeah, I brought my sandwich with me because I don't. Start.
Call the 2020 annual meeting of the Hudson School District to order. This time, I'm Jamie Johnson, Board President. Introduce Bruce Hanson, Vice President. Carrie Whitaker, Clerk. Heather Logelin, Treasurer. Member Rob Brown. Member Sue Katas. And Member Bob Bauman. And also speaking today will be our Superintendent, Dr. Nick Olet, and our Chief Financial and Operations Officer, Tim Erickson. At this time, I'll turn the meeting over to Dr. Olet, who will handle the nomination election of chairperson.
All right. Can you, Carrie, how does this, I know you've been having trouble. Is this better? Muffled?
Much better.
That's amazing.
Yeah, well, Dave definitely projects better than I do. Pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 120.08, the Hudson School District, like all common school districts in the state of Wisconsin, is required to hold an annual meeting to allow the district's electors to take action regarding special powers reserved to the electors by the Wisconsin statutes, including but not limited to Wisconsin Statute 120.10. Electors are those residents of the school district who are 18 years of age or older. If there are concerns regarding a resident status of anyone seeking to vote as an elector, please let the chair know, and we will address those concerns as they arise. At this time, it is now time to elect a chairperson for the annual meeting. I will put a call out there. Any nominations?
I'd like to nominate Jamie Johnson.
We have one nomination. Any other nominations? Any other nominations? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the nomination process. And with that being said, we'll go ahead and take a voice vote of all the electors present. All those in favor of electing Jamie Johnson as the chairperson for the annual meeting signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. All right, the ayes have it. So Jamie, I will turn it over to you.
And I will turn it back over to you. So you are, I guess, going to use the podium for providing school district highlights.
Actually, I'm going to probably, I'm just going to present from my computer here. I know that with the hundreds of people we have in attendance, they'll still be able to see and hear me as I go through the highlights as we work through this. So if we can put the presentation up on the screen, maybe. It might be a Tim Miner thing. Oh, there we are. Okay. And I'm going to, as we kind of work through this, I'll just say next slide, please, and then you'll be able to go to the next slide. So as you see, this is our district highlights. It's kind of interesting, not that I'm going to comment on every picture, but as you can see, just how different COVID has made everything when we have people in mass, socially distanced, and spread out, and what that process looks like. So just to give a little background on our school district, we are over 830 full-time employees. I believe we sent out over 1,200 W-2s last year, which means full-time and part-time employees. We are the largest employer in St. Croix County. We this year welcomed 45 new certified staff members. I think that is our largest. I know it's the largest new staff class we've had since I've been here, but it might be one of our largest new staff classes, certified staff. And then we've also welcomed 3 new administrative staff positions. Plus, we had 34 and counting new support staff positions that we've welcomed. As we talk about the Raider Way, it's kind of surrounded in everything that we do. We want to have, welcoming environment where we have a safe and supportive learning environment. We want to make sure that our students, our staff, and our families are all involved and are constant contributors to what we're trying to do here. The student-centered portion of the Raider Way is just that. We want the students to be the folks who work. This has been extremely evident as we've gone through our COVID planning and everything that is related to that. I think what's interesting, as you can see, this picture was actually just taken last week, and this is Mrs. Kottenbarger, principal at Rivercrest Elementary, reading to our elementary kids. Even our littlest learners, they're all masked up and ready to go. It is always neat to get into the buildings and see the different creative masks that they have on. As we look at transforming learning and wanting that continuous improvement piece, there's a couple things that I want to touch on. Is we have our district scorecards. We also have our newly adopted strategic plan. As we continue to push forward and continue to get better, I think there are a lot of districts that would potentially envy where we're at from a standpoint of our student scores and how we perform as a district, both in the classroom, on the athletic fields, in these auditoriums, and in different places. But everybody is constantly striving to get better as we continue to work through that. Our continuous kind of improvement model is looking at data and tracking it and really trying to make decisions based on what we're seeing and how it gets better. The culture of excellence is about keeping students' best interests in mind. And it is a challenge at times, because there are some times when we have to make decisions that may be what's in the best interest of our kids, but may not necessarily be what's in the best interest of our adults. And those are kind of competing interests at times, and we try to balance those things. But I think one of the things that really does maximize our culture of excellence is the fact that we do have such a student-centered approach here, and that goes from our teaching staff to our administrative team, all the way to everyone in our support staff. I will say that the one thing I will say about this picture, and I know I said I wasn't going to talk about every picture, but this is Dave giving the back to school lunch conversation with our new teachers. And it's because that was a day that I happened to go in because I thought I had a sinus infection. I did have a sinus infection, but however, because my symptoms were related similar to COVID, they made me COVID test. And so then they wouldn't let me go back to work. And it was negative. So everybody is fine. But it was one of those things where it's like, what do you mean I can't go back to work? I'm supposed to talk in about an hour. And they said, no, I'm sorry. You have to wait until you get your results back. And so Dave did a great job filling in. But, and again, I'm sorry. I know I said I wouldn't talk about all the pictures, but I thought some of those were interesting. So our district areas of focus, these have been areas of focus that we worked on. We've been looking at these things for at least the last 3 years. They kind of come into alignment with our strategic plan, but really looking at the strong academic achievement at all levels, and where our district scorecards tries to measure that, and at different points and in different areas of our K-12 continuum, or actually 4K-12 continuum, or even you could say early childhood 4K-12 continuum. Preparing students for postgraduate success with life skills, supporting a supportive and inclusive learning environment, and then recruiting, retaining, and supporting quality employees. And I think the nice thing about this one, and I think it's a point that we try to make with our staff on a regular basis, is that we see that supporting our staff and having a quality staff is as important as what we do in the classrooms. And it's important that we retain them and we recruit quality people. And then I think the last piece is not unique to the Hudson School District, but it is something that we have gotten a lot of positive feedback on, which is keeping our parents and our community engaged. And that's a big piece of what we do, because it seems that no matter how much you communicate, it can never be quite enough communication. So trying to look for different ways in which we can work through that. So as we start to think about some of the district development planning that we've been working on, we have been working on the strategic planning initiative, as we talked about at the last meeting, and it ties back to our leadership development with student education. We have created the school start time advisory committee, and some of these committees started up and then COVID hit and we had to put a pin in them as we worked through it. Launched Hudson's virtual charter school. That's been a real success with Dave and his team. Formed the district-wide family engagement committee, really trying to get feedback from how we can continue to engage families. Our mental health advisory council, in talking with them about how we can look at the mental health needs of our community, but also our kids. I think one of the things that's a bright spot, or a point that I should note, is we had way more people that wanted to be on our mental health advisory committee than we had spots available. I mean, which was really great that people wanted to reach out and be a part of that. We've done things like the district 30-day wellness challenge that was led by our human resources department, implementation of our electronic time systems. And then we did start off by creating a facility advisory committee, improvement advisory committee. However, before we could even meet just once, COVID struck. And so as we've talked about, we talked about this summer, our goal now is to shoot for January is when we're going to kick that thing off once we kind of get everything under our belt. But we did go through kind of the facility audit with the architectural firm, and we're in a good spot that way. So as we think about a couple other things that have been a major focus for us, mid-March, our focus shifted to the the COVID situation that we're in, the pandemic situation. We created our back to school blueprint, and we came up with our guiding principles as trying to just work through or highlight what it is that we believe as we make decisions moving forward, because a lot of times people say, why do you make that decision, or why have you come up with that conclusion? And so those guiding principles, which I think are extremely important, and I think just to highlight them, that we do believe in the 4 A's, that academics, athletics, arts, and activities. You can call it extracurriculars, co-curriculars, curriculars, but really it's really about the well-rounded education for all of our kids, and that's important for the well-being of our kids. We do believe in educating the whole child, and we believe that having face-to-face interaction and instruction with those kids is the best way to go about it. It's not that we can't do it in different ways, but we feel that is really what we want to strive for as we work through it. One of the other things that we've spent a lot of time talking about is not providing opportunities for kids can be detrimental long term. I've had this conversation. I know we've talked about it at the board table. I've had this conversation with folks in the community. Is a lot of times people say, "Well, Nick, you don't know what the long term effects of COVID are. I mean, they could be quite bad on heart or on a variety of things." And I said, absolutely. And COVID is very serious, and it's something that we definitely want to take serious. But the one thing I do know is we do know what the long-term effect is on messing up teaching a kid how to read, because it will have a long-term effect. If we don't do what we need to do with our kids and get them, especially when it comes to teaching kids to read, you'll change their life trajectory forever. You'll change the type of jobs they can have, the colleges they can go to. You'll change potentially their socioeconomic status. You could potentially change who their life partner is and who their spouse may be. I mean, all of these things can happen. And so we do know that the long-term effect of messing up that process is a big deal. And so that's why it's not, again, that we don't think COVID is serious. COVID is very serious. It's just we also know that we have to look at these other decisions as well and do these things. We also know it's our responsibility to mitigate risk to our staff, to our kids. We want to try to provide as safe as an environment as we can without creating a false sense of safety that we can provide a COVID-free environment, and that's just not possible. And then I think it's it is critical that we believe that people follow the protocols that we put in place, both our staff and our parents and our kids. Some of the things that I think is district achievements is it's tied back to summer school, and you'd say, well, why is summer programming an achievement? Well, when you think about where we were at just 3 months ago, having kids back in our buildings was a pretty big deal. We had over 570 kids involved in our K-8 summer enrichment classes, another 225 high school students involved in classes this summer. 64 of our learners with some of the most challenging needs were able to do the extended school year program to meet their needs. We had 193 kids in our summer swim program, 434 middle and high school students in our Raider Elite, which is our strength and conditioning program, that participated. Our school age care never really closed. I mean, we were offering child care all the way through the pandemic, and we had an additional 81 high school students involved in our marching band program. And so why I think this is such an achievement is because we were able to do that in a way that we were able to bring kids back, give them some sense of normalcy after being a couple months off, and do that in a manner that was able to keep people safe at the time. And again, interesting with this picture with the young lady with the saxophone, if you notice, a lot of our band members had special masks that allowed them to wear a mask but still play an instrument. And the marching band did an outstanding job this summer, keeping people socially distanced and working through that. As we continue to move through our district achievements, we had 180 AP scholars with honors and distinction, along with 9 national AP scholars. That's some of the highest numbers you're going to find just about anywhere. We were voted again one of the best communities for music and education. Our middle school tech ed department again last year was considered the program of the year. For the state of Wisconsin, we had some wonderful opportunities as it related to placing second in cyber mission and STEM competition with our middle school, where our kids are competing. You can see a picture with our middle school tech ed team there receiving their award. It was great. We had competition in the geography bee, the math counts, the spelling bees, science Olympiad. If you remember, we had those kids come in and talk to us. And if you remember the spelling bee, I think somebody asked how he began studying for it, and he said he started by reading the dictionary, and it was quite an impressive feat when you're talking to a seventh grader. That's how they're approaching it. And we had some middle school problem solvers that was great. And so getting to see our kids use critical thinking skills, problem solving skills is always great. Holton Elementary was a school health bronze award, and which is about the whole school, whole community, whole child, and what we were doing. Our EP Rock, Hudson Prairie, North Hudson, and Willow were considered outstanding schools as it relates to the Wisconsin School Counselor Association Program of Promise Award. And our very own Sarah Fleer was the Wisconsin School Counselor of the Year for the state of Wisconsin. So that was a great accomplishment. And she was in talking with the board, if you remember, kind of last year, towards the beginning of the year when some of that information came out. As we look ahead to this year, one of the things that is constantly driving our discussion or driving what we're doing is can we stay in face-to-face instruction, and what does the pandemic bring for us? On the screen right now, you see what's called our school closure metric or matrix, and it guides our instructional model and whether or not we're face-to-face or we're hybrid, virtual, or a combination of both. And we've been very fortunate that the first few weeks of the year, we've been able to stay in level 1, which is face-to-face 5 days a week. Right now, barring any major changes, which it doesn't look like there probably will be any, it looks like probably on Wednesday we'll be able to also make a determination for another 2 weeks of face-to-face instruction, K-12, coming up. And so, and again, it doesn't mean that we don't have cases in our district, but it means that we're within what we consider reasonableness. And I think the last couple items that I think it's something that we want to talk about looking ahead is we're going to continue our strategic planning. We're going to be operationalizing that strategic plan and reporting back to the board as to what that means so that you guys have that information. Equity and inclusion is going to be a major part of our work. I've had some great conversations with some different folks from around the Midwest to engage in equity conversations, both to look at doing a formal equity audit, both at the desk audit of our materials and policies and all of those components, and also then inclusive of focus groups and really getting more anecdotal and qualitative information as well to get an overall picture of where the district is. So then we can work with some different groups then to create what's kind of almost like a strategic plan within our strategic plan. How are we going to address equity in our district? And I think it's important for people to understand that equity and inclusion is not one of those things that you just do in a month or 2 months. It's not just something to say, hey, we talked about it, therefore we're done. I mean, it is going to be a journey. As we've had conversations with different folks, it is going to take a while for us to get to where we want to be. And we're going to be starting, I think, relatively quickly, but it does take a while as we work through this, and that's kind of been consistent. I've talked to 3 different groups at this point. I have another one coming up tomorrow, and that seems to be the common theme, that if you want to do this well, it takes a while to do it well versus just saying that we've done it. And so that'll be great. And so I think that'll be part of our process and part of our reports moving forward. And then I think our school start time committee that resumes here coming up in late fall and winter, and then our facility improvement advisory committee that resumes just after the first of the year. So that's really kind of where we're heading as a district. And then I think kind of the last slide, really, it's just kind of our mantra that we've tried to keep in at the forefront of what we're doing. This is what we do with our staff shirts and everything else. Be patient, be kind, keep others in mind, and really we know that everybody's patience is somewhat frayed as it relates to COVID, and we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to try to be kind to folks, to try to work to give people the benefit of the doubt as we kind of work through some of these things. But it is a stressful situation, not just at school, but in people's personal lives. So we're working through that. So with that being said, that's kind of where we've been over the course of the year, and then where we're heading this coming year. And there'll be lots more to come as the year goes on, as we'll have different presentations at the board meetings. So that's all I have at this point.
All right. Is there any questions or comments for our superintendent from the electors, which includes everyone, I think everyone in this room right now? I just want to say if there's a way that us board members could purchase one of those T-shirts, because I'd like to wear it around the house.
And I believe we do have some of those shirts. So yep.
All right. Anyone else?
Did you say you're going to wear that around the house?
Yeah,
so
just as a
to remind your
to our
wife,
family. Yeah.
to remind your wife.
Okay. Yeah.
I thought maybe we need to get them for your whole family. That you could, kind of as a reminder.
Yeah, whatever. All right. My son takes an extra large. But, all right. So thanks for the highlights. It's always great to see our accomplishments over the last year. I mean, we get them in, bi-monthly or semi-monthly increments, I should say, but to see them total up over the years, it is pretty amazing and very affirming. So next up, I'll turn the mic over to our board treasurer, and Heather has a report for the district financial overview. You have your choice of the podium or your seat, whichever.
Well, since someone went to all the work of
podium there. So.
Right. I'm sure it makes me look 10 pounds thinner and 2 inches taller, right? Well, I don't need the height, but great. Thanks so much, Nick. I appreciate especially you putting the photos in there. Metrics are important when it comes to student performance, when it comes to educator effectiveness, when it comes to money, which is what we're going to talk about in just a minute. But I think those photos remind us of what it's all about and why we're here. And it's those kids and those staff in our building. So thanks for including those photos. So I'm Heather Loughlin, and I'm honored to serve as the treasurer of your Hudson School Board. In just a moment, Chief Financial and Operations Officer Tim Erickson is going to present the proposed 2020-2021 budget for our district. But before he does so, I'd like to take just a few minutes to provide an overview of our financial position. Our annual meeting packet, which if you haven't had a chance to review, I hope you will. I'm sure it's going to be available online as well as here for those of you who are with us.
includes more than 25 pages. In fact, I think it's 30-something pages full of financial information, budgets, pie charts, bar graphs. It even includes a 5-page glossary should you come across an unfamiliar term. School financing is complicated, with resources coming from numerous local, state, and federal sources. That said, the biggest chunk of funding in this proposed budget, more than 60%, comes from property taxes. That's right, from all of you and from me. And I understand that you want to know that your tax dollars are being used well. Providing an excellent experience for all students requires a wide range of investments, from specialized professional development to new curriculum to contracted services to meet all students' needs. Our district is very thoughtful about how it puts its financial resources, including your tax dollars, to work. And I hope that you, like me, not only board treasurer, but a taxpayer and a parent of 2 students in our district, feel proud, not only of the outcomes we are achieving, but of the way that we are managing our financial resources. The good news is that the Hudson School District is in a strong financial position. While there's a lot of information in your 30-something page packet, there are 3 things that I want to call out. First, even with almost $2 million of budgeted COVID-19 mitigation expenses, the proposed mill rate is decreasing by 3.57%. What does this mean? It means that while everything else seems to be getting more expensive, the taxes assessed on your property by the district may actually decrease this year. 2, we have a strong fund balance, and we think that's prudent in these uncertain times. Per Board Policy 3121, we strive to have a fund balance equal to 25 to 30% of annual expenditures. The proposed fund balance for this school year is just above that range, and we think this is good planning for our district, given the unknowns with both COVID-19 and state funding. There is still a possibility that our state legislature will pass a budget repair bill this year that would impact this year's budget, which, as a reminder, is already assuming a decrease of $885,000 in equalization aid. And the bill for the next biennium, so for 2021 through 2023, could present some serious challenges. Our district has twice experienced a cut of 10% of state aid. That amounts to about $10 million over a 2-year budget cycle, and we want to be sure we're ready for this. The fund balance we have will give us resources to bridge that gap if needed, ensuring that we are continue to be able to continue providing an excellent 4K through 12 experience for all students. The third thing I want to call your attention to is that we continue to have a significant underlevy. So an underlevy means that our district is levying less than it is legally allowed to do so. In other words, direct tax relief to folks in our district who own property. In our case, the proposed underlevy for this next year is $3.3 million. Last year, we had the largest underlevy in the entire state of Wisconsin. Over the past 19 years, our total underlevy is more than $125 million. So the mill rate is decreasing, we have strong reserves, and we continue to underlevy, all while continuing to provide a great 4K through 12 experience for our kiddos and to attract, retain, and support our talented, dedicated staff. On behalf of your Hudson School Board, I thank you for your continued support of the students and staff of the Hudson School District, and I am pleased to support the recommended 2020-2021 budget. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Heather, for that report. Well done. And next up, we have Tim Erickson, the Chief Financial and Officer.
Thank you. I want to welcome everyone tonight. If you're viewing via video, that's great too. I just want to thank, there's a number of people I want to thank. When we look at this budget process that lasts about 6 months, there are a lot of different people involved that help in the culmination of this process. So I just want to thank a number of those different people out there, especially Mark and Tammy in my office that do a lot of the work to help assemble the booklet that you've got right now. So without further ado, I think, jumping into some of our budget challenges, which is going to be on page 7. Well, okay, hold on. I'll just back up. School funding equation. This is a very simplistic view of what the school funding equation looks like. So districts in Wisconsin are under a revenue limit. Means they can only raise taxes to a certain amount, and you add state aid in, and that's your revenue limit. So you take the revenue limit less the state aid that's determined by the state, and then the remaining amount up to that revenue limit is property tax levy. That's the most simplistic terms or equation we can get with this. It involves a lot more than that, but just so folks get a little bit of an understanding. And we can jump to the next page, Tim. So we'll cover in this meeting, we'll cover the proposed budget and levy, the impact on the property taxes, and then we've got some comparison data of the other Wisconsin school districts. And then we'll take questions regarding the proposed budget and levy. So one of the things when we look at budget challenges is addressing reduced state funding levels. And what we experience here in Hudson is that our property values are growing at a much faster pace almost every year than state average. And that puts us into what's called a negative tertiary aid. So we have a decreasing amount of state aid and more of an increase in dependence on the local levy to balance that budget when you go back to that simple equation. So that's one of our challenges more long term. Short term, in the next 1 to 2 years, as Heather mentioned, we could even have a budget repair bill this year that would affect this year's budget. The likelihood of that seems to be decreasing a little bit. But if we look the next couple of years out, so 21 through 23, there's a possibility that we could have aid reductions from the state, as Heather mentioned in her report. And so those are the things that we need to be cognizant of as we move through the budget process and making decisions. Again, addressing instructional needs for all learners, maintaining the class sizes within our class size guidelines, and then sustainable funding of long-term maintenance and capital improvement plans for all facilities. We've got some great facilities here, but many of them are aging facilities, and we need to make sure that we keep those up over the long term. So we'll go to the next page. Budget assumptions that are built into this budget. Our state aid, as mentioned before, it's $885,000 less, or 4.1% lower than last year. And if you measure that and compare that to consumer price index for the last 12 months, which is 1.5%, it's a pretty big delta to have to make up. The estimated mill rate of $9.99 is down about 3.5% from last year. And overall property tax valuation is estimated to increase 7.2% this year compared to 10% last year. And the state average is 5.5%. So we continue to really be above those state averages. The under levy, which is the amount of money that could be levied but is not in this budget, stands at about just under 3.3 million. And that is direct property tax relief for taxpayers. It's important to note that our district has had an under levy and continues to have an under levy. We've had one for several years. Heather mentioned some cumulative amounts, which we'll review quickly in one of the graphs. But we're kind of an island under ourselves when we compare ourselves to other districts in Wisconsin. The budget also assumes a 1% board approved increase to salaries and wages, and also includes performance pay structures. This year we've got a $225,000 levy proposed for community service, and that's to recoup the losses sustained due to COVID-19. As a footnote, about 72% of schools across the state levy for community services. This is our first time doing that. Under the current version of the budget, we've got COVID-related expenditures in the budget, and I won't go through all of those, but they total about $1.8 million. And so we'll talk about that a little bit later as we get into some of the detail of the budget. So when we look at that detail of the budget, and this piece here is on page 9 of the book. We've got a highly summarized piece up on the screen here. But when we look at our major pieces of funding, which are property taxes, which is the first line of that budget under revenues, and equalization aid, two of our biggest pieces of funding, funds the majority of our expenditures. So we've got a 3.3% increase in that levy for the general fund, and equalization aid, as mentioned before, is going down 4.1%. Federal sources are up significantly, almost double what they were last year, which is good news. But again, when you look at the demographics of the district, our federal sources wind up to be 0.5% to 1% of our total revenue, but doesn't contribute much to it. Other districts wind up being higher than that because many of the formulas for federal funding are based on free and reduced lunch count, and that's how the federal funding formulas work. So we're up about 0.5% in total revenues. When we look at expenditures, our expenditures for salary and benefits, of course, we're a service organization, so those are going to be the majority of our budgeted expenditures. They're up 0.4%. Now that's even by adding some of the COVID-related expenditures that were on the previous page. We're up only 0.4% there. So that's a very small fraction of a percent. When we look at open enrollment out, that number is slightly higher than last year. It's a real general estimate because final numbers don't come out until later. So we'll have a better idea as we move into that final budget approval process in October. Most of the other COVID-related expenditures are in the expenditure lines 300 and 400. So other purchase services and non-capital expenditures. And so the reason why those areas are going up so much is due to adding in those things like dividers and different supplies. Going down into that bottom line there, so total general fund expenditures is 3%. If we were to take out the COVID-related expenditures of 1.8 million, we're at a third of a percent increase, so almost flat in our expenditures if we take out the COVID-related items. Going down to that next section under the general fund surplus or deficit, referring back to 1920, so we had, because due to the closure, we had an underspend of about 5.1 million. So that would increase our unassigned fund balance by a total of $5.8 million. We intend to take out a little over $1 million on that next column, over $1,052,000 in this version of the budget. So it would reduce that fund balance down. And as Heather had mentioned, as we look out towards the next biennium, that's where we could see some budget reductions. And, we don't know at this point if they'd be significant or not. But this sets us in a position to bridge the gap, really, and going forward. So, we're in a very good spot right now. If we look under the committed and unassigned fund balance summaries, we have dollars for capital projects in at $1.7 million. And those are to fund some of our larger projects that just can't be funded solely through operating. We've got self-funded health insurance balance of 1.9 million. And incidentally, we've saved cumulatively millions of dollars by moving to self-funding. So that's been a great piece for us. Our projected unassigned fund balance for 2021 would be 23 million, just over $23 million. So it's about 32%, which is 2.4% above the board policy of 25 to 30%. And again, that just sets us in a good spot when we start to move into the next biennium. If you look at that that last section at the bottom, the estimated mill rate is $9.99, and that's a 3.57% decrease over this last year. Okay, we'll go to the next page. The next page is just a representative 20-year snapshot of our aid membership, which aid membership is what drives the state aid pieces and drives the revenue limits, et cetera, in the different formulas that we've got for funding. In the past few years, we've been relatively flat with enrollment. It's gone up and down slightly, but relatively flat. So if we move on to the next page, next page shows the general fund state aid revenue since 2014-15 up to the projected 2020-2021. And that trend line is trending down over time. As we've mentioned, there's been a shift in the amount of percentage of aid versus the percentage of tax levy. So we'll move on to the next page. And so in this chart here, this is general fund revenues. And you can see federal sources amount for a very, very small piece of the total pie of funding for us. And when we look at our state sources at 38%, local sources at 59%, that's where a number of years ago we were at about a 50-50 ratio there between the two. And moving on to the 2021 proposed budget, they're changing slightly, but not significantly. So we can move on to the next page, which has the chart for expenditures. Again, you can see the expenditures, salaries and benefits are our largest pieces. So they make up about roughly 68%, depending on which piece you look at. And then purchase services, again, a larger piece of that pie at 14 to 16%, and then so on. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of how we spend our money. The next piece really talks about how the impact in levy is changed with the addition of improvements on property. So this first example is a change in assessed value, but no change in the levy. And so each property is assessed at $100,000 value. And then that assessment is assumed in the example to go up to $110,000. If we look at that, each resident, only 2 homes in this district, so each resident owns 50% of the total property value in the district. In 2019 and 2020, the levy is $3,000. So the same for each year. Each residence pays 50% of that total levy, which is $1,500 per residence. In the next example, now we introduce new construction into this. So when there's new construction, in this example, we have an assessed value of new construction coming on of $100,000. After that, so the pie breaks down a little bit differently. So each resident owns 33% of the property value in the Raidertown School District, and the original 2 residences' shares of the levy is decreased. So it shows in the example, this is how that impact of new construction can impact levies and the impact on existing residences. So in this case, the levy per residence goes from the $1,500 for the 2 residences to $1,000 each for the 3 residences. Under that table, the table at the very bottom, that gives us what percentage of values of the total valuation in each municipality new construction consists of for 2020. So the city of Hudson is at almost 4%. That's about, it was running about that same level last year, but prior to that, it was about half that. It was running around 2% for 3 years previous to last year. So it's fairly significant for the city to go up that much. The town of Hudson, again, and the village of North Hudson are higher than the previous few years as well. So we've seen more construction activity and more valuation added to the district. And if we go to the next page. So this has a historical valuation. Again, this page is a summary of the detail that's in the book. And in this case, you can see down at the very bottom of that section of valuation, we're at just under $5 billion and a 7.17% increase. And if we look at the percentage change for the levy, it's 3.37%. mill rate drops down to 9.99, and the percentage change in the mill rate drops down to 3.54%. So if we look down at the bottom of that section in the book, it gives a breakdown between each municipality and their valuations and how they've changed. So we have a low in the town of Troy of 4.4% to a high in the village of North Hudson of 11.68%. So we're seeing a pretty wide range of values there, and those things do impact the levy. So when the district goes to take the total levy and has to allocate it to each one of those jurisdictions, it does have a different impact depending on if valuations are going up equally across all municipalities or if they're going up in more of a striated fashion here. And if we go to the next page is our balance sheet. And when we look at things such as receivables, there's a $19 million receivable on June 30th of 2020. What that mostly represents is that those are tax receipts. That is not cash that's available for us to spend. Those are tax receipts that are receivable, and we receive those into the following year. So fund balance is important to a school district, not only to help in times when you have lean times where we may be anticipating that in the next biennium, but also through the course of a normal year where we have, we have periods that we go without much funding at all, but all the while we're incurring expenses. So it's important to have cash flow to bridge those gaps. The alternative to that is you go out and you cash flow borrow. So you have to incur borrowing costs and interest expenses. So we do not have to do that at this point, as we're fortunate in that we don't incur that for our taxpayers. So that's one more page. Last page is our general long-term obligation debt here. And you'll see that balance at 2021 stands at 108 million. Of course, that was part of that was our total referendum for the middle school and the high school and the auditorium and stadium. And then the payments on that balance for 2021 will total about $7 million, and that's part of our levy, the board or the voter approved levy. And you can see what the levy will be. The levy will be about $7,060,000 on that total. And then if we jump to the other data, this next chart represents the total educational cost per member and total revenue per member for school districts, taking Hudson on the left column and comparing it to the state average in the middle, and then the CISA 11 average on the right-hand side. So you can see under total revenue, our revenue per member is $14,539 for 18-19, and that's the latest data that's available from the state. And the average for the state was $14,822. So we're a little below that and a little more below that when we compare ourselves to our CISA 11 average. When we look at the total educational cost per member, we're at $14,195, and the state average is $13,757. So we're slightly above that, and even slightly a little bit more above that when we compare ourselves to our CISA 11 average. If we go to the mill rates on the next page, and this takes mill rates in comparison to our CISA 11 districts. So you can see all the districts down at the bottom. We were at 1036 last year. Now we'll be down at the 999 level. When that we'll be able to comparatively get that information for next year with all the other districts. But I would guess that we'll probably move down the list a little bit, moving down to that 999 mill rate. And we'll move to the next page, Tim. Our under levy, again, this is something that's fairly unique to Hudson. School districts do under levy from time to time. Many districts don't do it every single year, and many districts don't do it in the amount that we've done it over the years. So when you look at this chart, the annual underlevy is the striped bar, and the cumulative underlevy is the diamond shaped bar. And when we look at that, we've underlevied cumulatively over since 0304 about $125 million. That's I would dare guess that's more than any other district in the state has underlevied. Our annual underlevy certainly has come down. Part of that's that structural change I talked about in our funding, where we're seeing more of that shift in the negative tertiary aid going up. And actually it's going up from the underlevy for this year's going up from last year's. Last year's was about 2.7 million. This year's proposal is about 3.3 million. So that underlevy is increasing even over last year's. We look at the next page. That's comparison of other districts that have an underlevy, and we just sorted this one at a level of $200,000 or greater, just because there are many levies that are very small amounts. But so these would be the largest ones, and of course you can see this is 18-19, 5.1 million. As I mentioned, we were at 2.7, about 2.7 last year, and we're projected to be at 3.3 million this year. So again, when you compare that to other districts, we're far and above, higher and cumulatively much higher than any other district. So we'll go to the next page. Next page is the resolution, and that's been broken apart into the general fund, debt service, and community service fund. And then the last section after that is that section that Heather referred to as for light evening reading. If you have insomnia, that's a great place to start. So
all right, thanks for the report. Are there any questions of our Chief Financial Officer regarding his report? Hearing none, I'll move into the hearing section of the annual meeting. This would call the hearing open on the proposed budget. So this is a time where anyone can make comment, certainly could ask questions. Going once. Anyone? Going twice. Third call for anyone wishing to speak on the proposed budget. Hearing none, I will now entertain motion to approve the resolution as specified on page 26. And I think for purpose of the annual meeting, we do need the whole resolution read.
Mr. President,
Heather?
I move to approve the resolution that a tax in the total amount of $49,811,272, $42,525,846 general fund, $7,060,426 debt service fund, $225,000 community services fund, be and is hereby levied against the taxable property in the Hudson School District for school purposes.
Second.
All right, we have a motion by Heather, second by Rob. Again, any further comment regarding the resolution as read? Remember Logan pointing out that the three sections used to be just two. We had the debt service and the general fund, but now we've added the community service included in that total levy amount. And this would be reflective of a levy at $9.99.
right. Yep.
Any questions? Hearing none, I'll call for a voice vote of all electors present. Those in favor of the budget signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed to the budget and levy signify by saying nay. The ayes have it, and the budget and levy are approved. I'll now entertain a motion to set the date for the annual meeting for 2021, which is suggested to be the second Monday in September at 7 p.m.
Mr. President,
Yes.
I move that we set the date for the 2021 annual meeting for Monday, September 13th, 2021 at 7 PM.
Second.
All right. All those in favor of being here in 364 days, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, the ayes have it, and the meeting is set for September 13th, 2021. At this time, there are other annual meeting powers under the statute that can be brought forward to the body. I remember that happening once in the last 7+ years. So,
I'd make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
all right, there's been a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, we are adjourned.